So thanks for coming today. I think you'll find that in all the different lectures, everyone's going to be doing something slightly different. So some people will be sticking more to the specs, and some people are going to be going sort of all over the place. So you'll be getting a bit of everything. I've given you the feedback sheet, so if you want to feedback either after each session or at the end of the day or when you go home or something, then that's great. But do as you wish. I wanted to focus on. I sent an email around and asked for a few ideas about what I could talk about, and I found actually from all the suggestions that I could kind of fit them all in, because Greek religion is a bit of a amorphous blob that you can everything joins to everything else. Okay, so and what I wanted to do, I wanted to give you an example. I call it modern scholarship. I don't know how modern 2000 is. But up to about 2016, this is the sort of scholarship I'm looking at. So it's kind of modern scholarship, and it's sort of the big paradigms that have been in Greek religion for the last sort of couple of decades. So for the first bit, sort of looking at religion and society, I'll be looking a bit about religious participation, the link between politics and religion, especially the links between the polis and religion. And the main work that I'm going to be looking at there is Sylvanus Inwood's work on polis religion. Okay, this is it hasn't been superseded, but sort of the gaps have been filled in since, and the gaps being filled in. There's a good book in 2012, Rethinking Greek Religion. So this sort of covers the more personal side of it, of Greek religion. I should say, if you've got any questions as we're going along, feel free to ask. Okay, feel free to interrupt. So covering, so if your students are writing an essay or want to talk about polis religion and a link between politics and religion, then think of giving them and talking to them about Sylvanus Inwood, okay? Because it is one of the big sort of paradigms that's been in recent years. If they're talking about the personal experience of religion, think about giving them something from Julia Kint, Rethinking Greek Religion, which explains why we need to add more things to our ideas of Greek religion. Again, looking at the sort of tension between the polis and the individual, looking at really, really briefly. All of these things are just sort of suggestions for further work and other things you can do with your students. Looking at the case of Socrates, brilliant book by Robert Parker. I keep on calling him Richard Parker, who I think is the tiger from Life of Pi. But Robert Parker on Greek religion, 2011. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. It's a really good book, especially for more able students. And then finally, I'll be having a look if I have time at the end, if I'm still sort of alive, looking at understanding Greek religion, cognitive science of religion, and looking at epithets, how the Greeks could believe that there was, many different Zeuses, were they one Zeus, were they, lots of different Zeuses, and that sort of thing. So these four sort of big topics can be covered in four sort of current books. And these are the books here. I've given you, and I will give you as part of the handouts, excerpts from each of these, which you can sort of then use in your teaching if you think it's interesting. The Richard Buxton Greek Religion, this is where you find the 2 essays on polis religion by Sylvanus Inwood. Okay, they were actually published before, but this is where they've been sort of published for the first time in one volume. Rethinking Greek Religion fills in the gaps that polis religion sort of doesn't reach. Understanding Greek religion is all about cognitive science of religion, religion from a completely different perspective. But even so, this is an introductory textbook to anyone wanting to learn about Greek religion. So this is actually a good general introduction as well. Robert Parker here on Greek religion is just fantastic. He's giving you sort of arguments behind things. If you've got a sort of a base level of knowledge, he sort of takes you away to really think about what you're looking at, thinking about how the Greeks understood their religion. And he's the one who's sort of giving you the idea of Greek religion as really ungraspable. He talks about, I think it's him who talks about Greek religion as a archipelago with lots of different islands that don't really join together. And the only sort of big island is sort of around Athens, where there's a few roads, but even then it's not really navigable. So the idea of Greek religion as something very difficult is something to, if your students don't understand it, and if you don't understand it, that's fine, because it's very difficult to understand. And it's also contradictory. So one thing could be true in one place, and wrong in another place. So the sort of spheres of religion that you've been given in your sort of religion and society, the household theme, polis, and pan-Hellenic, there are sort of a few more. I'd add personal religion, just the idea of your personal belief, which would have informed each of these levels, okay? And I'll talk a bit more about this as we go along. There's also the level of the genie, the extended family. So that would have played a role in people's religious lives. And then beyond the polis, you've got the Pan-Hellenic, but you've got the regional in between. So I studied Boeotia. So you've got, there's a regional religious identity as long, on top of there being a polis identity and a Pan-Hellenic identity. So all of these things are happening all at the same time. And I'll be looking, if I get round to it, for polis, the Deme religion, I've got a couple of slides on the sacrificial calendar of Urkia, which gives you an idea of just how specific religion was in different areas. So the links between polis and religion, 7 year inward. This is her introduction, okay? And what she's doing, she's attempting to reconstruct and make sense of a religious system to which we have extremely limited access. And what she's trying to do is make it scientific. It's very difficult to do this. She's trying to get rid of all our conceptions of what religion is. And so we're looking at religion in a completely objective, scientific way almost. But what you do, you sort of throw, as far as I'm concerned, you throw the baby out with the bathwater when you do that, because you've got the personal experience of religion isn't really taken into consideration. Greek religion is this amorphous, multifaceted, very difficult thing to understand, okay? This isn't going to help anyone. I thought, it's a bit like quantum physics, which, I've probably lost most of the room here, I don't know. But if you know anything about quantum physics, you've got the electron. And the electron has what they call wave-particle duality. It's both a wave and a particle. And basically, no one understands the electron. But sometimes it acts like a wave, and sometimes it acts like a particle. If it acts like a particle, you don't know where it's going. If it acts like a wave, you know where it's going, but you don't know where it is. Okay? It's completely nuts. Greek religion is like an electron. Okay? If you try and pin it down and understand it and make it make sense, you have to get rid of all the sort of variables. You know where it is, but you don't know where it's going. You don't really know very much about it. You've pinned it down to a scientific load of assumptions. And this is what Civilisation Inward did by tying it to the polis. Okay? But something had to go. Something had to be left out. And that is sort of individual experience, mysticism, magic, to many extents, oracles, dreams, all of that sort of stuff. To make it make sense, you need to sort of really get rid of some of the sort of interesting stuff. But it works. It's a really interesting way of approaching Greek religion, and it makes a lot of sense if you see things from the polis point of view. And as I'll go on to say, because the polis is like a pair of glasses that it's like you put it on and everything is polis. And it's not so much that the polis shaped Greek religion, it's that the polis is in everything. The Greek religion naturally fitted to shape the polis. The idea of the polis controlling it is sort of slightly wrong, as we'll go on to see. So as he says, this is the introduction, the polis provided the fundamental framework in which Greek religion operated, and this is very true. Think of the polis frames everything in Greek religion, and everything is viewed through that sort of political spectrum. The interesting thing about Greek religion is that there's no orthodoxy. There's no written text. There's no dogma, in a sense. In the same way that that you have the Bible or the Quran. There's no written text telling you what to do and what not to do. So belief is quite liberal. What you believed is quite liberal. But on the other side, what you did was quite restricted. So you've got this idea of, which I'll talk about in a minute, orthopraxy against orthodoxy. Orthopraxy is doing the right thing. That was sort of the main way of practicing Greek religion. What you thought about it, in many ways, wasn't seen as important, but it was important, as we'll see. So Civilisation likens it to the way that the church controls modern religion. Okay, but she says even that is sort of misleading because we're using a modern way of trying to understand Greek religion, of our understanding of religion, and foisting that onto the an ancient system which really has nothing to do with it. There's an extreme way of seeing this sort of control of religion by the polis, and that's seen in Burkett. And Burkett's writing a few years before Civilisation Inward. And this is from Kint. According to Burkett, the concept polis religion encompasses, first of all, self-representation of the community through religious cults. Second, it suggests control of religious practices by the polis through its decision-making organs. And third, polis religion sometimes implies that the polis created and transformed its religious institutions. So effectively, the polis actually makes religion. And this is a sort of a kind of a negative view of religion. Religion as the opium of the people, created by the government in order to control people, you know. And it sort of really misses the point of what religion is for most people and why religion was so important for the Greeks, in that they actually believed it and it was important to them. It was like a central concept to them. And as we get on to the end, we'll talk about CSR. This is a point of reference you can give to your students. The Greek religion isn't some weird thing that some stupid people did a few centuries ago because they didn't know any better. It was a natural reaction, a sort of a religious impulse that everyone has to a degree, and it was just their way of expressing that in their time and place. So really, it's a way of, instead of keeping them at a distance, CSR is a way of putting your students and you back in that same position and asking, what would I have done? What would I have believed? Why would I have believed these things? So it's a really nice way of looking at things. The other thing about polis religion is to remember that it's not a monolith. It's not one, when you imagine the word polis religion, you imagine one thing, but it was different in every polis. So you should probably call it poleis religion. It's it would have been, there were thousands, according to Mogen Hansen's, there were thousands of poleis all over the Greek world. So in a sense, there were thousands of different polis religions. Okay, so again, bear that in mind. But the polis religion does work. The polis does control certain religious things, even at different levels. So we've got the example here of Delphi and of oracles in general. Was that so at Delphi, for example, as Souvenir Inward talks about, the polis mediated the participation of its citizens. And one of the most obvious ways of doing this is, say, promantia. Okay, so the order with which you could consult the oracle depended on your polis's political, standing at that time. So at different times during Greek history, different groups had different orders in their promantia. So the Aetolians, from like the 3rd century, became the top dogs. It was always Delphi first, then whoever was in charge of the Delphic Amphictyony, then whoever they liked at the time, so you could see your political standing. So again, one part of the process, and also how you paid for it and how much you paid, did depend on your polis and that sort of thing. But, as Kint argues, so this is now looking at rethinking Greek religion by Julia Kint, where she's sort of arguing against the sort of limited nature of the sort of idea of polis religion. She says, while the economic side of oracle consultations thus fits into the framework of polis religion, it's not always true for the questions asked and the responses received there. Okay, what you as an individual went to Delphi or Dodona to ask has nothing to do with your polis. I mean, sometimes people went as representatives of the polis, but mostly for individuals, and especially at a place like Dodona, which has very much a local interest, and it was sort of very much local people going in there from most of the tablets that we have. The questions that you asked were personal. It was about, which god should I ask for this? Should I get married? Is so-and-so cheating on me? Those sort of questions. So there's a few here that I've got from Ide now. Thrasybulus asks, by having sacrificed to and appeased which of the gods? So who does Thrasybulus have to sacrifice to in order for his eye to become healthy again? Okay, nothing to do with polis religion. But for the man in the street or the woman in the street, these are the sort of questions that would have been most important. These were the people whose daily lives were to do with their own health, household religion, that sort of thing, completely out of sight of the polis. Okay, so looking at personal religion is a really important way of sort of filling out your picture of.
So those examples from him, they're Dodona.
These are Dodona. Yeah. So I've skipped over from Delphi to Dodona now. So Thrasybulus is asking about his eyes. I like this one. Aegis asked Zeus Naos, so Zeus of the temple, and Dione. Remember, Dione was his consort at Dodona, about the coverings and pillows which he lost, whether someone from outside stole them. I mean, what does that tell you about the process? I mean, I think what it tells you is, it must have been quite cheap and easy to, at least less than the price of some pillows to go and consult to find out about these questions. So the idea of when you think of oracles, don't always think of Delphi and the sort of everyone queuing up and only seeing the the Pythia, 7 days a year, or whatever it was, 9 months a year, wasn't it? Think about things like Dodona. Think about the ease of the normal sort of questions of someone just popping in to find out whether who stole his pillows. Okay, there is apparently a bit more to this than meets the eye. The idea of if someone outside stole them, and that seems to be trying to set up against someone inside stealing them. So this is maybe someone trying to find out whether his slaves stole them from inside the house or someone from outside the house stole them. So there's a bit more going to it rather than just where are my pillows gone. But it's still interesting to see the sort of everyday concerns that people have that have nothing to do with the polis. Okay, nothing to do with that structured way of seeing religion. So the polis model is of little help to us in understanding the motivations, intentions, and dynamics of these private oracular oracle consultations. So as I said, Kint is a really good. I've given you her introduction, or the first chapter as part of the sort of downloadable things. So it's worth looking at because she gives a critique of polis religion and gives an idea of how one might best understand Greek religion as a whole. And what you have to admit is that this amorphous blob just doesn't go away. You can look at it in sort of two different ways, but you can never really put Greek religion together into one easy, coherent way of looking at it, because it's so broad, it sort of defies understanding as a complete system. And the sort of things that Kint wants to include are personal religion, so religious belief, fundamentally, and this is what we look at in cognitive science religion. The actual fact that people believe this stuff, and that we might have believed it if we'd have been there too. Magic as well. In my lectures, I talk, magic really shouldn't be separated from religion as such. It's the same thing. It's a belief that the gods can help you to do certain things. It's no different to sacrificing and prayer. It often takes place in less, in private places perhaps. That might be the difference. It's just something that's happening in your house, and it often has a sort of a negative thing, or, it's like love tablets or curse tablets or things like that. But it's the same thing. It's just one big spectrum of how can I interact and influence the divine. So really putting magic and religion as separate things is slightly wrong. And again, theology is just people sort of thinking about religion, and again, which you don't really see in the polis model. So Kint's talking about how the polis model, how these models are trying to define a whole sort of religious system for a polis. They focus on agency, and agency is how you did things, because we don't really know what people believed. People didn't really write that much. The evidence for the man in the street's belief is very, very limited, but the evidence for what sacrifices happened, how religion was ordered, that sort of thing, we've got the inscriptions. Okay, we've got people's testimonies about that sort of thing. So how Greek religion was ordered, the orthopraxy, doing things in the right way, doing sacrifices in the right way, what was it that caused miasma, these sort of things we know very well. So it's very easy to go down that sort of way. People's ideas and the religious discourse, the more sort of orthodoxy sort of side of things, we don't really know very much about, which is why it's more difficult to look at it overall. As she says, there's plenty of evidence for religious practices unmediated by and with no obvious links to the polis. Unmediated practices include personal belief, magic, oracles, superstition, dreams. We'll be looking at some dreams in a bit, that sort of thing. But really, from the individual point of view, it was all one thing. It was all part of their general belief. This idea of orthopraxy versus orthodoxy. There's a good book, Robert Parker, his book, Greek Religion, 2011. I've given you a chapter of that as well. He talks about this sort of setting up of a dichotomy between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And it's kind of a cheat. It's not really true. It's just an easy way of us understanding Greek religion, because from all our sources, and to make it easy to look at, then it is easier to look at how they did things. And we've got sort of an extreme view is taken from Fontenelle in his Conversations of the Plurality of Worlds. And he gave a formulation of Greek religion, which is basically do what everyone else is doing, sacrifice just as they're doing, but you're free to believe whatever you want. Okay? He didn't really mean this completely seriously, but it's a sort of as if. That's sort of almost how they do it. as a sort of blanket way of approaching Greek religion, really orthopraxy and the way you did things and doing the sacrifices really was more important to the Greeks. They didn't really bother so much about what you believed as such. So there is an element of truth in it, but we don't want to take it too far. See, Fontenelle was not saying the Greeks didn't believe anything. Okay, they clearly did believe. The fact that we've got all of these sacrifices, all of these dedications, all of this literature about religion. The Greeks believed. For such a long time through their history, most of the Greeks believed fundamentally in the gods. So we're not questioning Greek belief. Fontenelle's point is rather that there was no attempt to police these beliefs. So there was no overarching sort of Catholic Church excommunicating people because they believed in one thing rather than another. You were free to believe whatever you wanted as long as you did what everyone else was doing and didn't sort of stand out in that way. Sort of a case in point that sort of shows how complex it really is Socrates, and especially when we see him through memorabilia of Xenophon. Xenophon's idea is Xenophon's always a bit more simple and down to earth, and he's a bit of a farmer soldier rather than a philosopher. So his view of Socrates is obviously different to Plato's view of Socrates. But his idea, this is where orthodoxy and orthopraxy are sort of put up against one another. Socrates' indictment, according to Xenophon, was that he was guilty of refusing to recognize the gods acknowledged by the state. There's also importing strange divinities, his daemon, which you all know about, probably the voice that he used to listen to. He used to tell him, I think he only used to tell him what not to do. He didn't actually tell him what to do. He told him to stay out of politics and that sort of thing. Never really told him what to do positively. And then corrupting the youth. So the sort of the political element as well, and the fact that he had people like Critias and others like that in his circle. But the thing that Xenophon focuses on as his defense of Socrates was this refusing to recognize the gods acknowledged by the state. He was indicted for not acknowledging nomitsein. It's nomos, law, custom, habit. It also means sort of belief and practice. So it can mean sort of so many different things. So Xenophon argued for practice, nomitsein, as to undergo sacrifices, to be seen going to I was going to say church, going to the temple and doing the right sacrifices at the right time. So as far as he was concerned, the nomitsein box was ticked. Okay. But for other people, obviously, they knew that this wasn't quite true, that even if Socrates was doing these things, then it didn't necessarily mean that he believed these things fully. He had his own gods, he had his own daimonion, okay? He had his own thoughts about these sorts of things. So these other people obviously believed that this lack of acknowledgement meant belief, because he was jumping through the hoops, but obviously he wasn't believing it. Xenophon wasn't seeing it sort of clearly enough. He was seeing it in a very sort of, okay, he goes to church, he has communion, it's fine, he's religious. But other people obviously took these things a bit more seriously. And if you read this in Parker, there's a little bit in a chapter all about sort of orthodoxy and orthopraxy. You'll get a bit more of this that you can perhaps talk about with your students and get a bit more out of this. Epithets. This is another example. I want to start with another example of non-polis religion, which is dreams. I'm only going to talk about one dream, and the reason I'm talking about that dream is because it then mentions an epithet, which I'm then going to go on to talk about other epithets. But it's Xenophon. The fact is that for the Greeks, I don't know whether you've read Theophrastus, the superstitious man. It's sort of a caricature of people taking belief in things, like if a weasel runs across your path, you go back inside and don't come out for 5 days or something. But that sort of idea of religion, of signs being everywhere. The god, for the Greeks, the gods were always trying to communicate with you. And it was never quite clear. The only place you could sort of vaguely, clearly get an answer from them was at an oracle, okay? Which is why a lot of the oracles, especially at Dodona and some of the sort of the lot oracles behind sort of Delphi, for example, ask yes-no questions. Because it's the only way you're going to get a decent answer from an oracle is asking a yes-no question. But dreams were I know that on your specs you've got incubation, you've got about mystery religions, and you've got about, I don't know if it's Asclepius, and about the cures that come from Asclepius. Again, there were lots of dream oracles. You had Amphiaraus or Oropos is another one. But that's really personal religion. That's where the God appears to you and gives you an answer that no one else can sort of say anything about. You're the one who's been given that revelation. And so dreams for the Greeks were, again, a sort of a direct personal communication with the God. Didn't necessarily mean that you knew what they were saying, but you know, this is something, again, that the polis, the idea of an overarching sort of church, keeping tabs on your beliefs, you know, and that's nonsense, because they had nothing to do with, you know, what you believed and your own responses to these dreams. So we've got Xenophon. This is quite, what is it, book 3, but he's sort of having a flashback, and it's all sort of gone wrong. And this is where he's got to Persia, or got to wherever it was that he's going, and he's realized that he's been tricked, and that Cyrus, the man who was leading him to do, I think they were going to be fighting in Turkey or something, I can't remember what the exact thing was he was meant to be doing, that it's all a charade, and actually Cyrus wants to go and lead a revolt against his brother, the king of Persia. Okay, so Xenophon is feeling sort of dubious about whether he should go on or not, but the money's good, so I think we know what he's going to do. So they did not know how to proceed, and he, Xenophon, I just love the way that Xenophon writes in the third person, and he, Xenophon, was upset along with the others and could not sleep. When he did get a little sleep, he had a dream. It seemed to him that in the midst of thunder and lightning, a bolt fell on his house he had from his father. He judged that the dream was good in one way, because he dreamt that when he was in difficulty and danger, he had seen a great light from Zeus. But he was also worried because he thought that the dream had come from Zeus the King. Okay? So he doesn't know, he's being ambiguous here. He doesn't know whether it's good or bad. The fact is that the dream came from Zeus the King. Okay? Why is Zeus the King? This is Zeus Basileus. Zeus the King Basileus is something that he mentions further on in the book, and it may be because of this dream that he's trying to keep Zeus Basileus on his side. Zeus Basileus was worshipped in various places. He was worshipped in, there was a big unfinished temple to him in Labadia in Boeotia, a really big place, and they had sort of big games called the Basileia and stuff like that. So he was an important sort of little Zeus by himself, an important little epithet of Zeus. But here, obviously, he's said something to Xenophon in his role as Zeus the King, because it's the king that Xenophon has now realized he's going up against. Okay, so from now on, the next thing we hear about, much later, he talks about that he's been sacrificing to Zeus Basileus. And I think it's possible that it's because of this dream that he's wanted to keep Zeus Basileus, this king that he's upset, on his side. Okay, and he's being very specific. He's being very specific in his Zeus sacrificing. He's not sacrificing to other Zeuses. It's just Zeus Basileus. I've got, as part of the handout as well, I've downloaded all these sections from Xenophon as well, and some on Pausanius a bit later. So you can, again, look at this and maybe go through this in class if it's useful, about talking about how epithets were sort of understood and used. So this is Xenophon a bit later. He's now, it's all gone wrong. They've run back. They've seen the sea. But they're kind of stuck. He's kind of stuck in Turkey. Many other people also sent Xenophon this message, saying that he'd been maligned and would be best on his guard. And he, hearing his reports, took 2 victims and proceeded to offer sacrifice to Zeus Basileus, Zeus the King, to learn whether it was better and more profitable for him to remain with Soothis on the condition that Soothis proposed, or to depart with the army. Again, it's an either-or question. You know, shall I go with Soothis, or should I, you know, And the god told him to depart. Okay, so he's sacrificing to Zeus in this particular form as Basileus, potentially because of what happened earlier and because of his dream. Then he gets to Lampsacus. From there they sailed across to Lampsacus, where Xenophon was met by Euclides, the Phliasian seer. Euclides congratulated Xenophon upon his safe return and asked him how much gold he'd got. The important thing, I mean, he's a mercenary. This is the whole point. What, you know, and the glory, but mostly the money. How much gold have you got? He replied, swearing to the truth of his statement, that he would not have even enough money to pay for his travelling expenses on the way home, unless he should sell his horse and what he had about his person. And Euclides would not believe him. But when the Lampsacene sent gifts of hospitality to Xenophon and he was sacrificing to Apollo, he gave Euclides a place beside him. And when Euclides saw the vitals of the victims, he said that he well believed that Xenophon had no money. But I'm sure he went on that even if money should be about to come to you, some obstacle always appears. If nothing else, your own self. In this, Xenophon agreed with him. Then Euclides said, yes, Zeus my Lycios, Zeus the merciful, is an obstacle in your way. And asked whether he had yet sacrificed to him just as at home. He continued, where I was wont to offer sacrifices for you and withhold victims. Xenophon replied that not since he left home had he sacrificed to that god. Okay, and you got it in the Greek there. In the Greek, saying that you don't do something, you actually say he didn't say that you did something. So he didn't say that since he left home, sacrifice, whoops, look at that, touchscreen. Tethukaine, tuto to theo, just to the god. He hadn't sacrificed to that god, tuto theo, to that god. So here it's treating an epithet of Zeus as if it's a different god. I haven't sacrificed to that god. So you've already got this sort of dichotomy. Did the Greeks believe that Zeus was one god, or was Zeus many gods? Is Zeus my Lycios, Zeus merciful, a different god to Zeus Basileos? Okay, he obviously was in Xenophon's mind, because here he says, I didn't sacrifice to that god. And here you've got Zeus my Lycios. What's really important is that each epithet has their own way of sacrifice for them. As you see, Zeus my Lycios, he's got the form here of a snake. This is from Zea, so from a harbour just outside Athens. He's got the form of a snake, so he's chthonic. He's a sort of chthonic Zeus. And in the way of sacrificing to chthonic victims, he's sacrificing a holocaust, which is something you often do to underground powers to sort of keep them on your side. So this is a kind of a dark underground aspect of Zeus. And he's also getting pigs. And if you think about Demeter and the sort of sacrifices, pigs are often associated with sacrifices to sort of chthonic deities. So as you see, different epithets were not only thought of as different gods at one level, but they were also, the way that you treated them was different according to their various needs. Okay, so in a way, the way of telling apart, the way that you interacted and told apart these epithets was the way that you interacted with them, was this orthopractic way of sacrificing to a certain god with a certain epithet in a certain place, in a certain manner. Okay, and you can contrast that with a more sort of reflective idea that Zeus lives on Olympus and that all these gods are still Zeus. But on the ground, doing things day to day in a sacrificial manner, you had to do these things for these separate gods in a specific way, as if they're separate gods. Okay, and the Greeks could sort of believe both things at the same time, which I'll go on to explain, hopefully. So, one Zeus or many? This is what Robert Parker says. A god with an epithet was not a different being, just one aspect seen in close-up, and yet each part needed addressing as if separate, or almost as if separate, as Xenophon Anabasis attests. So Xenophon is a really good example to give to your students of showing how, in practice, a real Greek person was sacrificing to different aspects of Zeus, and how it made an effect that he'd missed out on sacrificing to one aspect of Zeus. Didn't matter that he was sacrificing to Zeus as Basilius. Zeus Mylichius still wasn't very happy, So when he had his Mylichius hat on, he wasn't very happy. But he had his Basilius crown on, he was happy. It's all a bit confusing, but it sort of makes sense. And I'll explain with CSR in a bit. Even more confusing, sometimes minor gods were treated as separate. So you've got, for example, Athena Nike. She was worshipped on a temple on the Acropolis. But you also had shrines to Nike as a separate being. Okay, you had Artemis Eilithia, the goddess of childbirth, but there were also shrines to Eilithia separately. So sometimes epithets could have their own independent reality. Sometimes they were sort of meshed into local gods, or bigger sort of Olympian gods. It's not clear how the Greeks understood this, but we know it had an effect on actual cult. So there were separate cults, as I said, for both Nike and Athena Nike. And another example is seen in Pausanius. So when Pausanius goes to Olympia, and again, this is something that I've printed out for you, you've got his talk about the gods and their epithets. You've got his talk about, he describes the big ash altar, and he describes the temple of Zeus Olympios for the first bit of his talk on Olympia. But then he goes to talk about, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk around and talk about all the other altars. And you can imagine, if anyone's been to Olympia, the whole place was sort of scattered with altars all over the place. Many of them we don't know where they are. So many of the ones that Pausanius is talking about here, we haven't got a clue where they are. So in a really, this is, Pausanius never gives you the good stuff, does he? That's what I find really annoying. And then he gives you in a really kind of useful detail, because now I can talk about all the different Zeuses, but it's a bit boring. If you're sitting down and read, it's not really a book for reading pleasure. But anyway, here he is describing all of the altars in, all the, yeah.
Sorry, I'm really distressed by this. Going to the altar within the temple, why is the altar somehow now inside?
Let's have a look. Where's that? Which line?
Sorry.
Oh, it's in the third. Sent to Zeus Olympius, going to the altar within the temple. Good question. I'd have to look at the Greek. It might be a bad translation. It might mean within the temple, within the temenos rather than. Yeah, I think it's just a bad translation. I will find out for you though. So he goes to Zeus Olympios, to Olympian Zeus, which is the main ash altar outside, which is fine. Then he goes to Zeus Laoitas, Zeus of the people. Laos is a man, Zeus of the people. Goes around to all these other ones. Wah, 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 wah. We go down to number 6. Here we go. This altar of Hephaestus, some Malians called the altar of Zeus Areos, warlike Zeus. Okay? So we've already got Zeus the Olympian. We've got Zeus, helper of the people. We've got Zeus Areos, warlike Zeus. Let's keep on going. Altar of Heracles, wah, 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 wah. At the place where the foundations of the house of Oenomaus stands 2 altars. One is Zeus Hercaeus. Now Zeus Hercaeus, here Zeus of the courtyard, has got his own nice little sanctuary. But as you probably all know, Zeus Hercaeus was worshipped in every household. He was one of those household gods. So this is his headquarters. But it's nice to know that he had his big shrine somewhere else. But so Zeus Hercaeus of the boundaries, one of the household gods that you're familiar with. Zeus Keraunos, Zeus of the thunderbolt. And each of these would have been worshipped in a different way, would have been sacrificed to at a different time, with a different ritual, different sacrificial animals, all of that sort of thing. So again, each of these epithets are being treated as if they're a separate god. And when you're a Greek and you're standing before that sanctuary, that shrine, that altar, then it's as if that god is there before you, and it's only that god with that epithet who needs to be treated in that way. Okay, so only when you sort of walk away and go home and think, well, better all Zeus, and Zeus lives on Olympus. These two things just, are fine. One of them's a doing way, an orthopractic way of thinking. One's reflective, one's intuitive, but I'll come on to that in a second. Right, Zeus Chthonios. So here, this is Zeus Chthonios would have been worshipped in the same sort of way as Zeus Mylikios. Again, it would have been this chthonic underground aspect. The beasts that would have been killed for him, it might have been holocausts. They probably would have been black, this sort of thing. Okay. God, he's still going, isn't he? Right, this is quite a few pages. Finally, we get to Zeus Katabatos, the descender, Zeus of lightning. Okay. And that one, he's sort of come back on himself. This is near the great altar made of ashes. The reader must remember that the altars have not been enumerated in the order in which they stand, but the order followed by my narrative is that followed by the Eleans in their sacrifices. So this is actually linked specifically to the Elean festival calendar. So he's obviously either seen it written or he's had a guide from Ellis who's shown him around, showing in what order they sacrifice to Zeus. And you'll see this again in the sacrificial calendar from Urkia, that there are, the calendar they've got is very specific about when to sacrifice to which gods, with which epithets, at which times, in which months, with how many sheep, with how many dogs, sometimes dogs, but and how many animals of what type. Okay, so this is Zeus Olympus. This is the order that he's been worshipped in: Olympios, Laertos, Katabatos, Areos, Hercaeus, Keranos, and Chthonios. How might cognitive science religion help us understand this complexity? Well, it might not at all, but it at least gives us a fighting chance. So this is a book. I did one of these teacher days online a couple of years back, I think 2020, and it was all about cognitive science religion. So if you go to our website and you look at the events pages, and you look, we've got the resources, we've got the videos. So there's a video of me talking in more detail about cognitive science religion. So you'll get a bit of a better overview of what it is, hopefully, or even better, buy the book. But again, I've given you the first chapter for you to have a look at, so you can sort of have an idea about understanding it. As I said, it's a textbook. It can be used as an introductory textbook to someone who's never studied Greek religion before. So it's not all completely CSR, but it does help explain certain things. And one of the things it talks about is the difference between intuitive cognition and reflective cognition. And intuitive, just the way you see things, the sun setting, no it's not, the earth's turning, but you see the sun setting. When I'm hungry, I eat. Intuitive. Don't eat 12 Mars bars. Learning from experience. It's that sort of difference. Throwing a rock in the air, it comes back down. Throw a rock at a policeman, you get arrested. It's that sort of thing. Zeus Chthonios lives in Olympia, but reflectively, well, Zeus lives on Olympus. I must sacrifice to both the Zeus Olympios and Zeus Mylikios as if they were separate. But in a reflective cognition, Zeus Olympios and Zeus Mylikios are both just Zeus. But in the everyday acting, ritual, Greeks were so, orthopraxy is so important to them. The doing of rituals, the treating it as if Zeus was there, as if Zeus in that epithet was a single god in this one place. That was their way of practicing religion. For them, religious practice was sacrifice. And this is the intuitive way of acting as if the god is there, is human or anthropomorphic, in a place, can be placated, understands English, all of this, understands Greek, all of this sort of thing. Have a look at my video and you'll be able to perhaps get a better idea of how these things. It's all about theory of mind and seeing purpose in outside activities that maybe don't have purpose, but you're sort of inbuilt to see purpose because you're used to interacting with humans and imagining that other people and the things that you're interacting with have a meaning and a reason and a thinking just the same as you are. So it's the intuitive approach which separates each of these different Zeuses, and each were worshipped in their own place as if physically present, but rationally they could be seen as aspects of one Zeus who lived on Olympus. And the Greeks obviously didn't feel any need to sort of reconcile these different views. You might also say that the Zeus who lives on Olympus was very much a literary model as well. And perhaps in their day-to-day lives, apart from when they were reading the Iliad, they didn't really think about it, they didn't really worry about it. They were more concerned with the Zeus Hercaeus, or the practicalities of the actions that they were undertaking in their daily lives. They didn't really sit around too much and think, I wonder whether those two Zeuses are different Zeuses. So veering towards orthopraxy, certain gods with epithets had certain locations or ways of being worshipped. These local aspects required actions and rituals as if separate gods, okay? And we saw Xenophon saying, I haven't sacrificed to this god. So it is as if they were separate gods. But going home afterwards, they would have reflected that different Zeuses were probably one and the same. And it's as if a god was responsible for many separate areas. So Zeus Hercaeus is in charge of boundaries, Zeus Areos is in charge of war, and that sort of thing. And each reflected in a different aspect. Each of these was reflected in a different aspect or epithet, each of which was addressed by the worshipper separately, as if they were separate gods. Each aspect had to be sacrificed to individually and specifically according to what you wanted from them, okay? So there's no point sacrificing to Zeus Areus if you wanted your courtyard kept safe, because he didn't care, okay? Zeus Areus had what was your courtyard to him? So you had to treat these gods as if they were separate, these epithets as if they were separate. But we knew that they were all sort of one Zeus at the end of the day. So we're running out of time. I don't know whether anyone has any questions. But here's a good example to give to your students. I don't know whether you've had sort of Attic inscriptions online, whether they're aware of this sort of thing. It's a really brilliant resource. It's got all types of different inscriptions on, mystery cults, Panathenaea, anything to do with Athens and Attica. You can find, and they've got brilliant notes down the side. So you've got the text, you've got the translation, and then you've got notes that will explain what's going on. So again, if there's a specific subject that you're studying in any one time, do you think, oh, maybe an inscription would be a good thing to find to illustrate this? Go on Attic inscriptions online, and you should be able to find something. There's a really good search thing. You can find a really good example. So this is a good example of a sacrificial calendar of a deme. And this is Urkia, near Athens. And again, it's a bit like the Pausanius thing. It's basically just a list, and it's a list of months and who was sacrificed to in which of the months. So here we go, in Anthesterion, in the city of Agrae, Zeus Malikios. And in this case, he's not getting... See, people do different things in different places. Here in the deme of Urkia, Zeus Malikios gets a sheep. Doesn't get a pig, gets a sheep, no wine, and roasting of the innards, and it costs 12 drachmas. There you go. Then you've got all of this. Zeus Poleas, Zeus of the Acropolis, he gets a sheep as well. That costs 12 drachmas as well. On the 25th, Zeus Epopetes, on the hill, sort of like the peeper on the hill, and that's Urkia itself. He gets a piglet, so he maybe has a bit of a more... A lot of these things that you see at this local deme level are going to have very, very local epithets and going to be linked to features in the landmark, or local stories and that sort of thing. So you'll find that, some of these Zeuses or some of these, especially the heroes, there's lots of heroes and heroines who are being sacrificed to in these areas. A lot of these people aren't being sacrificed to anywhere else in the Greek world. It's sort of very much that local, especially with heroes. Another thing I should say about Greek religion, don't underestimate how important heroes were, and not the ones from mythology, just the local heroes that were being sacrificed to. In many ways, if you look at Urkia, how many heroes are being worshipped, as part of people's everyday experience, those heroes would have taken up almost as much time as the gods. Okay? And they're also, a lot of them were ex-humans. They were relatable. They had an interest in you as a human and could help you in more specific and friendly ways, perhaps, than some of the gods. So you've got Zeus Epopetes. Who else we got? Let's go down. Any more Zeuses? Zeus Teleos. So that either means sort of perfect Zeus or married Zeus. Probably married Zeus if he's in Hera's sanctuary. At Urkia, he gets a sheep as well. Also sheep, poor sheep. Zeus Horios at Urkia gets a piglet. Zeus Epakrios on Mount Hymetos gets a lamb. So this gives you a really good idea of all the different types of sacrifices that each one is. I mean, some of them are very much similar, but some are getting piglets, some are getting sheep. Each one is getting something different or specific according to how they're being treated. And so these are their books. Again, I'll download the PowerPoint as well. These are the books that we've been sort of looking at, and I've downloaded examples from each of these, so you can take them away and see if there's anything useful. But yeah, I don't know whether that probably didn't explain epithets at all, but basically Greek religion is a mess, and anything goes. That's the other thing, is that you can say something about one place, and the opposite will be true somewhere else. So it's a bit dangerous when marking essays. You have to be sure that the person writing them hasn't just is not wrong. Maybe they got the information from somewhere else and they're talking about another cult somewhere else. But yeah, it is very, 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 very difficult, and you're very brave to be doing it. Has anyone got any questions? We have 10 minutes before the coffee, and it'll probably take us 5 minutes to get downstairs, to be honest. Yep.
I was going to ask, with the epithets, seeing as they were so localized, if you went to a different town,
Yeah.
business or whatever, and you learned about, you became aware of all these localized epithets of the gods,
Yeah.
when you went home, would you have to remember that now you know that they exist, that you should honour them? Or is
Yeah,
it
no.
in Rome or when in the ocean?
They're almost so local that they only need appeasing or placating or worshipping in that local area. Obviously, some of them do travel. The fact that Xenophon was worshipping Zeus Basilios wherever he went, you know. But no, they were quite free. I think the Greeks were quite happy to say, oh, well, they worship Zeus like that over there, but now I'm back here, I'll do it in the normal way. Like, yeah. They really weren't that worried about offending the gods of elsewhere. As long as they didn't offend their own gods or the gods that they were sort of with, then it didn't really... It's a bit weird, isn't it? But yeah. No, they didn't, yeah. I mean, obviously some people do introduce cults from other places, and especially in Athens, but they tend to be people, you know, foreigners introducing cults, or people who've been in Egypt for a few years and come back and have got used to worshipping Serapis or something. It's that sort of thing. But sort of bringing your Zeus epithet from Urkia when you move to Thebes or something doesn't happen. Anyone else? Yep.
One of the things I ask you, but also everybody else, with Greek religion, because it's so messy, when I thought about which bit of the specification do I teach first, I can never quite decide which way to go. So there's a format they give you on the specification and in the textbook, so you don't find that helpful. And I just wondered what people do first. Do you do polis religion first? Because it says to kind of do the nature of the gods, and within that you've got the epithets and the heroes. And the next thing on the specification is the personal experience.
Ah.
Then it's kind of polis religion, then priests, I think, and then philosophy. But because it's all so messy, I wonder if people kind of which way they start, or which way you would recommend.
Well, I mean, when I teach it to undergraduates, this time I did it, I introduced them to CSR at the beginning, and then I sort of went into sort of what is religion, and then polytheism and that sort of thing. And then I sort of hit pretty much early on about communicating with the gods, so sacrifice, oracles, and that sort of thing. But it's so difficult. The worst thing is everything knits into everything else, so that it becomes, it's quite false to rip it into little bits. And it's very hard to talk about one thing without talking about everything else. But if you're aware of that limitation and explain that limitation, then I think it's all right. I think you're pretty much free to do whatever you want.
Go back over it. You kind of constantly cross-reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is really difficult.
I can't kind of get my finger on which way what's best.
I mean, has anyone here taught it repeatedly in different and tried it in different ways, or we're all clueless, you see?
I just find I do, by the time I reach the end of the course, I've already taught them most of the stuff that was near the end anyway, because I had to mention it at the beginning. So
Yeah, you kind of overgoing it. Yeah.
Like it all just merges, which is why when they chopped off that philosophy bit for this exam,
It's a bit like,
it's kind of like you can't really, because
No.
if you're talking about anthropomorphism, you're going to bring in philosophy. So.
yeah, it's going to get dropped in there anyway, isn't it, really? Yeah. Oh, it's reassuring to know that people.
Yeah, you're not doing it wrong. No one's doing it wrong, because no one knows how to do it right.
And I think that's the thing with the students that find most difficult about this, I do it towards the end, is because this is so wide and so you can't pin it down. And some of them really love that, but others kind of struggle with the whole like, oh, don't know what the answer is kind of thing, which is kind of, okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
I don't know if this is trite, because I haven't really taught the course before, and it might be something in the textbook I don't know, but is there any valid comparison between, say, the Holy Trinity and Christianity, and these gods having different epithets in the fact of believing two things at once?
It's difficult.
Sacrifice, I guess, of the Holy Ghost separately to the Son of God and the Father, but the idea that three is also one, would that be the same with gods having different epithets, that it's the same God, but they're also separate, just on that fundamental?
Yeah, I would say that's useful, but anyone trying to, you wouldn't find anyone writing that in a Greek religion textbook, because they'd be worried about people projecting their own ideas.
There's lots of information about not mentioning Christianity
Yeah.
as well, yeah. So
But also, I mean, you can go too far in that direction. That's why CSR is really nice. It sort of puts everyone on an equal footing. That we're all trying to understand stuff, and we all have ways of of looking at. One thing that I find annoying is a lot of people who write about. I mean, I'm not religious, all right. Well, kind of. Who knows? God is a gas, that sort of thing. But when you when you look at Christianity and what things being holy mean to someone who's Christian, and see the depth of feeling, okay, people don't project that onto the Greeks. They think about Greek mythology and Jason the Argonauts, and it's not really deep. It's people like sacrificing stuff, and it's all horrible. But I think that same depth of feeling must have been there. So the way that people felt about Demeter and Persephone and that whole sort of myth cycle it must have been the same as Christians feel about Easter and death and resurrection, all that sort of stuff. And if you can look at the Greeks with that level of sympathy and seeing that their level of feeling is just the same as our level of feeling, then I think it transforms how you see Greek religion as not just, as I said, weird things that silly people thought 2,000 years ago, but an actual meaningful way of trying to understand the world and their place in it, and felt very deeply by these people. Well, obviously a lot of them didn't. It's like Christians nowadays with different perceptions of God. Some people see God as, they can't. He's sort of transcendent. Other people, he's a man with a beard up there. There's so many different levels of understanding. Even in a religion that has the doctrine written down, that in a religion where the doctrine wasn't written down, God knows what people were, thought and believed about religion. But we should at least allow them the full spectrum of emotions and feelings and thoughts about this sort of thing. So making your students see that it was an actual really important, meaningful thing rather than just sort of some weird, funny thing that you're trying to get your head around, I think is kind of helpful as well. Any questions before? Yeah?
Basically, I want to know if I'm doing this wrong. So with epithets, I have always told my students that it basically comes down to relationships. So I'll quickly interview one of the students and discover that I know she's Jane the student, but she's also Jane the flautist, and Jane the hockey player, and Jane the daughter, and Jane the sister. And the way in which I would interact with her as Jane the student, well, that's fine because that's an appropriate relationship, but I would not interact with her as if she were my sister. And I would not, nothing I can give her here in my class is going to help her be a better flautist or And so she is all of those things all at the same time. And it's about relationships. Have I gone way off the mark?
No, again, like the idea of Trinity, anything that makes that, I think that helps explain it to someone who doesn't understand it. It might not necessarily